It's 2009 and Disney just acquired Marvel as its next big acquisition towards building the Mouse brand. And while our mousy overlord was unable to secure the movie rights to Spider-Man, they did end up working out a deal to take the TV rights for Spider-Man instead, which unfortunately meant that they weren't allowed to continue working on what was arguably one of the greatest Spider-Man cartoons of all time in Spectacular Spider-Man, a show that was very serious, that cared very much about not only the source material but about writing the characters and making them feel real. Well, you can't just leave Spider-Man as an IP to rot off on television. You just acquired Marvel. You gotta make that money back somehow, and Spider-Man is a huge draw, especially for the kids. So what do? You reboot Spider-Man, and how do you differentiate yourself? You go the Ultimate route, and you take the Ultimate comics. And how do you further differentiate yourself? Well, you make it batshit crazy. You make a full-on Spider-Man comedy show. And if I'm being completely honest, they did a pretty damn good job of that. So let's talk about Ultimate Spider-Man and just how insane it really was. And if you're interested in seeing more content like this, please leave a like and subscribe, or hit the hype button down below. It all will help the channel out, and you'll get to see more of this content in the future. The Peter Parker that we meet at the start of the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon has been at the game for about a year. He is a decently experienced vigilante, and he's well known, especially by our favorite resident Daily Bugle owner, J. Jonah Jameson. But some things really do set this version of Spider-Man apart, even from the Ultimate comics that they took inspiration from. Did I say based on earlier? I meant they took inspiration, mostly in the look and the designs of the show, as well as with the ages of the different characters in the Marvel Universe. The real main premise behind Ultimate Spider-Man the cartoon is that Peter is being recruited by Nick Fury to not only become a superhero, but also to lead a team of fellow superheroes. We spend a majority of the first episode figuring out that while Peter is pretty decent at being a vigilante, he is still extremely raw to doing this. We're also introduced to a bunch of different cast members from Spider-Man's life, and this is where we start to see even more branches when it comes to the Ultimate comics this was inspired by and what this show actually does. They take the angle of continuing to make Peter and Harry friends from all the way back in high school, something that wasn't really a thing until Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. His relationship to MJ is similar to how it was in Ultimates, but also differs in a fair few ways that we'll talk about as this video goes on. But for the most part, the first episode is setting a baseline of what to expect from the show, what our Spider-Man is trying to achieve, and how he's going to get there. And it also does a lot to set up the humor of the show. I would say about a third to half of the runtime of each and every episode is dedicated to not only cutaway gags, but also dedicated to jokes involving Spider-Man and his inner monologue. I hope you really like the voice of Spider-Man in this show, that being Drake Bell, because you're going to hear it even more than I would imagine in any other Spider-Man show previously.
Actually, it probably stinks to be you every day. Then again, it could be me. I haven't washed this suit in a week.
He is constantly talking. For the 23-minute runtime of each episode, Drake Bell is almost always incessantly yapping. The dude never shuts up, which I personally love and find to be very Spider-Man-like, but if you don't like the voice, then it's going to be really grating as the show goes on. This version of Peter is also constantly breaking the fourth wall. He treats it just as whimsically as Deadpool does. During a lot of these cutaway gags that he's doing, he's speaking directly to us, the audience, as though he knows we're watching. Throughout a lot of the episodes, we see a lot of different cutaways, specifically to Spider-Man imagining how things are happening and what's going on throughout the world, often in a very comedic manner. Spider-Man is around like 17 or 16 years old during the runtime of this show, at least at the very start. And we're obviously made to help keep the attention of younger kids, especially compared to something like Spectacular Spider-Man, which was far more grounded and realistic. This show aims to be far more funny, far more exaggerated, even more comic booky than I'd argue Spider-Man is in the comic books when it comes to the camp and the funniness of the show. Now, the humor in this show is not for everybody, but I'll definitely be the first to say this show had me laughing a lot with its different cutaway gags. This first episode also introduces us to Stan Lee, who serves as the janitor of Peter's high school and has had a lot of interactions with Peter, considering he spent a lot of his high school time stuffed into lockers. I wonder who would be doing that. Peter truly, throughout the show though, wants to become the ultimate Spider-Man, the best version of himself he can possibly be, and he views doing that by working with S.H.I.E.L.D. Or at least it could be through working with S.H.I.E.L.D. Originally, he just kind of brushes off Nick Fury's offer until he leads a group of villains back to his high school after putting a tracer on him earlier in the morning fighting the Trapster, and he sees this as a gigantic failing on his part and also a way of him putting his friends in danger. So he goes to seek out S.H.I.E.L.D. and their help. And this is where the real premise for the show takes root, because in the second episode, we find out that not only was Peter being recruited for S.H.I.E.L.D. so that they could help mold him into a better hero, but because his job was to lead a team of young heroes, almost like a backup Avengers if you remember the EMH episode about having a future set of Avengers just in case. Yes, this Spider-Man is canonically in the same world as Earth's Mightiest Heroes, but that's a story for another day. The team that Spider-Man is supposed to lead consists of Nova, White Tiger, Power Man, and Iron Fist. They're all aged down to be teenagers, and they're all looking to be the best version of themselves hero-wise, but most of them are almost entirely brand new to being heroes. Okay, but despite the wide deviations from the source material and the funny cutaway gags, this seems like a pretty tame idea for a Spider-Man show. Nothing seems that insane, so what gives? Why call it insane? Well, Spider-Man gets a spider bike in the second episode of the show because he doesn't swing fast enough, so they give him a bike that shoots out his web fluid and he can ride on those lines to get around the city faster. I mean, we must be desperate for toy sales at that point, guys. Come on. Oh, and did I mention Spider-Man's entire team was transferred to his high school? They all had to uproot their lives to go live at Spidey's high school. Oh, and to top it all off, Phil Coulson, yes, that Phil Coulson, is the principal of the high school. Okay, that's not all that crazy, right? Yeah, in the third episode, they go to Latveria and take on Dr. Doom. The third episode of the show. Okay, some context to that last sentence. In the third episode, the team has only ever worked together one singular time, and the members of the team all have very different and distinct personalities. Peter is the leader, he's also the jokester, and he tends to get under the skin of everybody except Danny Rand, who tends to be the cool, calm, and collected Iron Fist. Then you've got Luke Cage, who is kind of like the muscle, and of course close friends with Danny Rand. White Tiger, she is pretty much your bog standard A+ overachieving student who really hates the disorganized chaos of Spidey's leadership, but ultimately accepts that dude's leader of the team. And then there's Sam, aka Nova, who just is so similar to Peter in temperament and the way in which he operates. The two clash and butt heads all the time, and that's where a lot of the inner conflict of the team comes from in these early episodes, because Peter and Nova like to bump heads all the time. And so the two of them enter a dick measuring contest to see who can destroy more robots the fastest during their very first Team S.H.I.E.L.D. exercise. Except the entire point of the exercise was to get to the other end of the room without alerting the security bots, but none of them bothered to listen to Nick Fury and instead just wanted to see who could destroy more. They tied, by the way, so neither of them even won. So of course Nick Fury says, no missions for you until you guys can actually cohesively work as a team. How did the team decide to solve this? Well, Nova's brilliant idea was to take down a member from the most wanted list of S.H.I.E.L.D. They were originally going to take down some low-numbered villain, but Nova found out that Dr. Doom was #1 on the list, and they said, we bring back #1? We bring back #1? It's over. So they went to Latveria to try and get Dr. Doom to appease Nick Fury. This team of fresh rookies went to Latveria, a sovereign nation, to try and extract Dr. Doom to bring to S.H.I.E.L.D. And it worked. Yeah, not only do they get there, not only are they able to take down Dr. Doom, but they're also able to transport him back to S.H.I.E.L.D. And Spider-Man is on cloud 9 because he thinks he's about to get a jetpack for this shit. Until it turns out that this was Dr. Doom's plan all along, and he was just a Doombot. An advanced version of the Doombots, because the team did fight a couple Doombots while they were there, but this was one that's like a life model decoy of one of my favorite gimmicks of his. Now I just want you to think about this from Nick Fury's perspective. A few days ago, you go out to recruit Spider-Man, a vigilante that's been operating for about a year and has actually been doing a fairly decent job. And while he's just a kid, you see this as a way of training the next generation of heroes. Unlike in the comics to do shady, horrific shit, this time it's to like actually be real heroes. You bring in Spider-Man, and what is his first true act as leader to do? Well, it's to obviously get the team together and disobey a direct order you gave because you're trying to coach them up into being the best they possibly can. And you see that they come back with Dr. Doom, one of your most wanted. And Fury immediately clocks that that's a Doom bot because there is no way this group of literal teenage superheroes took down Dr. Doom in his own sovereign nation, potentially also elevating this to a political kidnapping with somebody who has diplomatic immunity. Not real diplomatic immunity, but like the fake kind in TV where you can get away with murder. Either way, if you're Nick Fury in this situation, you might be a little furious. Yeah, he wasn't exactly too happy, and so now the team has to spend the rest of the episode catching like 8-ish Doombots, all of various sizes, because this Doombot just had like 8 of himself inside his own body, that are all trying to steal data from S.H.I.E.L.D. Yeah, he's pissed. And at the end of the episode, they have this really sweet moment where the whole team takes responsibility for going to Latveria, even though Ava is the most pissed out of any of them because she didn't want to do this, she just wanted to do her homework, man. That's all she wanted to do is get her homework done. Fury decides not to kick anybody out and to keep the program going. And of course, throughout all of this, I have failed to mention that Coulson is on a side quest to see how many institutions at the school he can cut to get the budget in check. He calls Nick Fury to ask for government funding to skim off the top of S.H.I.E.L.D. and their funding so that he can do the school's budgeting correctly. He's talking about taking away toilet paper, take the stalls away from the boys' bathroom, cutting whole sports. Oh, and at the very end of the episode, Dr. Doom lets them know that he's watching them, and Nova views it as him being punked. So they're off to Latveria again as the ending gag of the episode. When I said this show was insane, I truly meant it, because what other Spider-Man show are you going to see Spider-Man and a group of teenage heroes go assault Latveria and try to kidnap Dr. Doom to appease Nick Fury in the 3rd episode of the show? Mind you, in the 3rd episode of Spectacular Spider-Man, which I'm not really trying to compare these two shows because I think they were trying to do very, very different things, and I think it's kind of unfair to compare them considering Sony wouldn't even let Marvel continue to work on this show because Disney bought them out. But in the 3rd episode of Spectacular Spider-Man, Peter is trying to get photos for the Daily Bugle. He's worried about helping his aunt pay the bills. In this show, Spider-Man's fighting Dr. Doom and ignoring doing his school homework. Like, it's just, there are levels to what these two shows were trying to accomplish. And clearly we're going for the more absurdist, really Gen Z humor in this show, combined with the larger Marvel universe now that they can all play nice since this isn't just a Sony produced TV show. Now, as far as first 3 episodes to a show goes, that was utterly insane. But honestly, things kind of start to mellow out after peaking at Doom. At least for the next few episodes, things are chill. Mostly just world building, setting up the characters, setting up the team, and getting more housekeeping things done when it comes to building a universe in a brand new TV show. Something that this show actually goes out of its way to try and do. It establishes a relationship between Spider-Man and Iron Man. It establishes a relationship between Peter, his friends, future villains, and there's this entire subplot throughout the first season of Norman Osborn and an unseen Dr. Octavius, at least for most of the season, trying to build spider people that they can use as their own paramilitary group, basically. But in all of that, we then get to episode 10. So do you remember that time in the Ultimates comic books when Peter Parker and Wolverine swapped bodies? And while Wolverine was in the body of a young Peter Parker, he tried to crack Mary Jane, who was like 16, even though mentally he's still Logan, just in Peter's body. Yeah, I remember that. God, Ultimate X-Men was such a mess. Right? Not what this video is about Ultimate Spider-Man, the TV show. So anyways, The writers of this show definitely remembered the mind swap gimmick, and when I say this show was inspired by the Ultimate Comics, I mean they take a lot of ideas from them, both good and utterly horrible. So we got an entire episode dedicated to Peter Parker and Wolverine swapping minds. And before you ask,
Baby, I do like me a redhead.
yes, they did leave that plot point in the episode, and yes, it is still just as weird and gross as it was in the comic book. Of all things to keep in, they chose this. But what else do you expect from the weird POS that happened to watch potentially his kids who were brother and sister do it in a forest? Not what this video is about. Not what this video is about. Okay, now let's talk about the rest of the episode with that out of the way. It begins all with the mutant Mesmero. His entire abilities and powers is that he can hypnotize people and get them to do whatever he wants them to do. In this case, rob and steal from the city, all for his benefit, and try to take down Spider-Man, who seems to be immune to the effects because of his mask. And all of this attracts the attention of Wolverine. Now, in my last video, I talked about how much I love the Wolverine from X-Men Evolution and how much he cared about his students, cared about being a better person, cared about being a mentor and family member to the team. This version of Wolverine is not any of those things. He is an angry, miserable little man that likes to take care of mutants that make other mutants look bad. That's kind of his whole thing. Which honestly, not that inaccurate for this type of Wolverine they're going for. Just not my favorite version. And also, it gets pretty dark throughout the episode. Like, he straight up just says, yeah, I'm gonna kill Mesmero, which seems pretty on brand for Logan. But the fact this is a TV show, like a kid's show, and they just acknowledge that Wolverine was gonna straight up kill him is kind of hilarious, because they get pretty close.
You were gonna kill him.
Sometimes you have to go down to their level.
I also like that they keep his beer drinking antics. They replace it with apple juice, like a generic apple juice, but it's so clearly meant to be alcohol. It's honestly a really nice touch. And if you couldn't tell from this interaction, Spidey and Logan do not get along at all. The two characters don't work too well together because they have very differing opinions of morality and what it means to be a hero. That is until they have to swap bodies Freaky Friday style because Mesmero was pissed that he got caught. And yes, he has the ability to make them swap bodies somehow. I don't know, man, he's a mutant. They all got a bunch of crazy powers. And when Spider-Man figures out that he's Logan, he freaks out and obviously has no idea how to use any of his powers, and it's hilarious. But what's even funnier is what happens when Logan ends up turning into Peter. He actually loses his damn mind at school and starts hissing at everybody like a legitimate feral animal, which this version of Logan pretty much is, considering how he was living in his room earlier. And it was also hilarious hearing my personal favorite Wolverine actor, Steve Blum, do the high-pitched nasally voice that Drake Bell has for Spider-Man.
Where am I? What is this place? At me!
And to top it all off, Wolverine's favorite hater of all time, Sabretooth, shows up to absolutely try and deck Logan, only for it to be Peter inside of his mind, and Peter tries, unconvincingly, to get Sabretooth to just not.
I know this sounds crazy, but I'm not really Wolverine. What?
Honestly, of all things to adapt, especially from the Ultimate Comics, I think the choice to adapt the story in which Peter and Wolverine swap bodies was absolutely ridiculous. And I think it's even, look, it's funny in a, how did this get past the board of directors for a kid's TV show to have Peter hit on MJ, rather than it being funny because that was the joke they were going for. It was extraordinarily creepy and weird, as I mentioned earlier. But the rest of the episode tends to be pretty fun. We even have an entire visual gag dedicated to Wolverine calling Peter's life a soap opera, which also includes Dr. Doom for some reason, who, mind you, hasn't really made an appearance since the 3rd episode of this show. It's all over the place, in my opinion, and that's kind of part of what makes it so much fun for me to watch, is it's honestly a lot of absurdist humor, and also some actual deep cut references that are pretty fun. There were mentions of Silver Surfer in earlier episodes, and of course, we have things like Wolverine, Sabretooth. At one point, like, we have Mesmero, man. Mesmero of all people. And of course, at the end of the episode, they get their minds swapped back, and everything goes back to being as it was, except Mesmero is absolutely laughing his ass off throughout this entire engagement because this was his way at getting back at them. And the episode kind of ends with Spider-Man and Logan figuring out that they have some common ground, and ultimately Logan telling him, "You've got a good life," which makes me think that his life is pretty terrible at this point, which makes me wonder if this is the Wolverine from Wolverine and the X-Men, because I know a lot of the Yostverse shows were connected, and this show is connected to Earth's Mightiest Heroes via the crossover they had, and Avengers Assemble was originally just a soft reboot of Earth's Mightiest Heroes. That's a question for another day. Ultimate Spider-Man was definitely an insane and off-the-wall show, filled with a ton of absurdist humor, and oftentimes not really caring to perfectly follow the source material, while also trying to squeeze in as many references as they possibly could. Peter breaks the fourth wall constantly. He's almost always talking to us, and that leads to a lot of funny moments, but it also leads to a lot of moments that is just like, damn, I wish he would shut up occasionally, which I think kind of works for Peter. This show is nothing like Spectacular Spider-Man. It's not even close in terms of quality when it comes to world building and storytelling, but I also don't think that's what they were going for with this show. I think they were really just trying to have a fun, enjoyable, comedic Spider-Man show with some occasionally serious elements. That's really how I read this show. To me, it is far similar to Superhero Squad, where it is mostly comedy and occasionally serious, rather than it being anything close to the other Spider-Man cartoons we kind of became accustomed to seeing throughout the years. Which for me makes it unique and interesting and not necessarily inventive, but worth its own introduction into Spider-Man cartoons. Does it suck that this show, well, not the reason Spectacular got canceled, is what came forth from it? Yeah, but I also think it gets a bad rap, partly because this is the show that had to succeed, was widely considered one of the greatest Spider-Man shows to ever come out. And of course, I'm biased because this was one of the few Spider-Man shows I actually got to see on TV growing up, because it aired in 2012, so between catching this show, EMH, the end of EMH, and finishing off Iron Man Armored Adventures, which this show and Armored Adventures overlapped in airtime, but I'm pretty sure this was on Disney XD and Armored Adventures was on Nicktoons. Either way, I still like this show, and I think that Ultimate Spider-Man was pretty insane. If you want to continue to support this channel and support me, like I said earlier in the video, like, comment, subscribe, hit the hype button down below if you're on mobile. As well, I have a Patreon where for $1 a month you can just support me as a creator, and you can see these videos early and without some of the changes I have to make for copyright to put these videos on YouTube for all of you to enjoy. But don't feel pressured to give me money because your viewership is more than enough. Thank you so much. Have an absolutely fantastic day.